Good afternoon and welcome to our weekly media briefing with Montgomery County Executive Mark Elridge. I'm Lorna Vigili, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. Keisha Davis. She's the county's health officer. Dr. James Bridgers, Director of the Department of Health and Human Services. And our two guests today are Jennifer Bryant, who is the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, as well as Rachel Silverman, Manager, also from the Office of Management and Budget. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Mr. County Executive, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thanks, everybody. And this is a little bit scrambled today because getting ready because we were on a meeting with the governor, governor's staff that interrupted and delayed another meeting we were in. So I'm a little bit late this morning or this afternoon. But thank you for joining us again this week. One of the hardest parts of this job comes when we lose an employee. And as we've seen over the last few days, the death of Master Firefighter Christopher Higgins on Saturday night has been felt here and throughout the region. Yesterday, firefighters from across Maryland led a procession for Chris, who died while responding to a house fire. Fire trucks and cars went through Baltimore and through the East County and past several fire stations, including the station he worked at in Burtonsville. Tributes like this show the strength and solidarity of firefighters everywhere, and the MCRF family is mourning. But Chief Corey Smedley has assured the community that firefighters will continue to protect our community even as they grieve. This is a sad and difficult situation for us, and our thoughts are with all of our firefighters, the East County community, as well as the family of Chris Higgins. Firefighters have jobs that are more dangerous than most. I don't think I have to tell you that. They and their family members know that with every call, someone may not come home. Those jobs are incredibly difficult because of the stress endured and the physical demands. And we are fortunate that this is a very rare occurrence. But when it happens, it's intensely troubling to people. I met with the Higgins family at the hospital that night, offered my condolences, and I told them that our county is going to continue to be there to support them. And I also passed along the condolences from our governor and lieutenant governor, and I want to thank both of them for recognizing what was happening here. These days are never, these are not the kind of things we want to happen, but when they do, we stand together to honor those who have fallen and support those who are grieving and move forward as we have to, even with heavy hearts. So it was been a hard week, but it's something that happens. The other big news in the world of the county is the governor proposed his budget. And we had a briefing prior to his proposing it today. So we've got a preview of what's in it. I wanted to say that, there are, I think, some real important things that the governor has done. Well, we haven't reviewed everything in the budget. I've been briefed by his staff, and I'm actually pleased and impressed with the direction he's going in. And I think he's acknowledging that there's no simple solution, and you're not going to get out of this, as he said, you're not going to tax your way out of it, and you're not going to cut your way out of it. Neither of those two things would get you where you really want to go. I applaud his leadership in navigating the dual challenges of a fiscal crisis, along with shifting federal policies while prioritizing bold solutions that promote economic growth and progressive tax reform. At the end of the day, whether at the state or here in the county, the need to foster economic growth is critical in order to change our long-term fiscal outlooks. As the governor noted in the Baltimore Sun op-ed, quote, economic growth is our North Star. Anyone who suggests we can cut our way to prosperity isn't being honest. Anyone who suggests you can just tax our way to prosperity isn't being honest either. The key is to long-term success is to build a consistent and robust economy based on economic growth. The governor's recommendations for tax reform are particularly noteworthy. I appreciate his recognition of the importance of progressivity in taxation and his implementation of combined reporting for corporations in Maryland. That doesn't affect a lot of corporations, but some of the corporations that it does affect, they're very large. And combined reporting that is something done in many other states around the country, including some of the most conservative states in the country. He also reduces the corporate income tax, and I'll talk about that again in the context of our CIP budget. The governor's taking meaningful steps to modernize Maryland's tax code. Many of you who regularly attend these media briefings have heard me talk about tax reform efforts over the last several General Assembly sessions, and I'm going to continue to push for more local tax autonomy. We need to be able to differentiate the tax rate between commercial and residential properties, the right municipalities already have in Montgomery County and also have under state law, but none of the counties have that authority. These reforms will help attract new businesses to our state while ensuring existing businesses have the tools to thrive. Our county is much like the state in our inability to deliver infrastructure that would help us attract and retain new companies or ones that want to grow here. As Governor Moore has rightly pointed out, our state's strength lies in its ability to create pathways for jobs, good wages, and wealth building. His budget shows they're willing to make greater investments in key industries like quantum, cyber, manufacturing, and artificial intelligence. In our conversations with the governor and his staff prior to this budget, we've pointed out places where Montgomery County is simply not able to compete, for example, with the state of Massachusetts for the incentives they're willing to offer life sciences companies to come to Boston. And we don't compete with states like Texas. When we were trying to bring a solar manufacturing company here, this county was not able to compete with what Texas could offer. And the state did not have plans or programs that allowed them to step up and even be competitive. And so we've got to be competitive, particularly when we're talking about high-paying, decent jobs and lots of capital investment. The investments the governor is talking about align with Maryland's extraordinary assets, such as world-class universities and federal labs. They also position Montgomery County as a state leader in these emerging technologies through the University of Maryland Institute for Health Computing in North Bethesda, and something that we'll be talking about very soon, but our first AI incubator, which is also tied to Maryland's presence here in the county. The governor proposes record funding for K-12 education and workforce training, ongoing support for other important programs, including housing and healthcare. These initiatives reflect the commitment to addressing the real challenges our state faces and ensuring that Maryland's a place where everyone can live, work, and thrive. I also look forward to partnering with Governor Moore and the General Assembly to build on this strong foundation and deliver the economic growth and opportunity that all Marylanders deserve. And that's my segue to Montgomery County's capital budget, which we introduced to the council today, and we're now going to talk with you about it. It's budget day in the county, and I transmitted to the council my recommended FY26 capital budget and amendments to the 25 to 30 capital improvements program. We call that the CIP. This year, this is the biennial or second year of the capital improvements program. So generally, we just make small adjustments. We adjust for programs that need to be changed because of inflation and they have to appropriate more money. On a good day, we get to move money out of programs that closed out and were under budget. And if there are projects that have a particular urgency, we might add a small project. But this budget does not generally contain major changes to the county's 6-year CIP. Those would come next year. So the amendments are limited to project changes that either meet the county CIP amendment criteria or the necessary to address capital operating budget constraints. Budget represents our ongoing commitment to investing in critical infrastructure, education, and economic development, even as we navigate a very challenging physical landscape. Our community faces significant infrastructure needs, from building and maintaining schools to expanding transit options. These projects are essential not only for our quality of life, but also our ability to attract businesses and to foster economic growth. Yet we're constrained by limited resources, rising costs, and truly outdated funding mechanisms. The choices in this budget reflect the difficult balance we must strike. We made it a priority to maintain funding for critical projects like bus rapid transit, school renovations, and accessibility improvements to county facilities. These investments address immediate needs while aligning with our broader goals of equity, sustainability, and economic growth. However, I want to note that what they don't have is we don't have the authority that local jurisdictions in Northern Virginia have. And I cannot simply put that into my budget. Northern Virginia uses special tax districts and other tools, and it's allowed them to make significant investments in transportation that have spurred economic development and reducing congestion. And as I'll show you later in a couple of slides, you can see where this is coming from on Virginia's side. I've talked repeatedly about former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell's op-ed that he wrote for the Washington Examiner in 2013 called Fixing Transportation Funding in Northern Virginia. And what's incredible about this op-ed is that everything the former governor said would happen did happen there over the last decade, while Maryland has remained stagnant. Maryland was ranked 31st overall and 37th for infrastructure and 47th for the cost of doing business. All you have to do is look at the recent CNBC rankings for the best states to do business, where Virginia was ranked number 1 overall, number 3 in infrastructure, and number 24 for the cost of doing business. While we are going to put this link to Bob McDonnell's article as well as the CNBC ratings in the chat, we would encourage you to read it as well, not just note that it's in our chat. This budget also reflects the impact of legislative changes on our ability to fund infrastructure. And some recent decisions by the council to reduce impact taxes have compounded our long-term funding challenges. And I want to be clear, I am more than happy not just to reduce impact taxes. I've made proposals to eliminate the impact taxes, but you can't eliminate the taxes if you don't provide replacement sources of revenues. And what we asked the council to do is to not make any further cuts this year, since they've created a committee to look at the possibility of changing our taxing structure, and to wait until we have a new revenue structure before we further cut the revenues that we depend on right now. The most dramatic change in CIP funding occurred in impact tax receipts. Based on updated estimates, the recommended CIP assumes of the use of $197 million in transportation impact taxes and school impact taxes. This is over 6 years. An estimated $69 million, almost $70 million reduction in CIP funding compared to prior approved estimates. Department of Finance reduced the forecast of school impact taxes for the FY25 to 30 CIP after a decrease in FY24 collection. Excuse me. After a decrease in FY24 collections to levels that haven't been seen since the Great Recession. 10 years ago in FY14, the county collected $16.8 million in school and transportation impact taxes, compared to FY24 collections totaling only $15.6 million, a reduction of $45 million, or 74.4%. To put this in the most blunt terms, every time you reduced impact taxes to pay for infrastructure, and then you go ahead and have to pay for that infrastructure, what you've essentially done is shifted this money off of business responsibility for building infrastructure and put it on the backs of county residents. And that's not what other people do, but it's what Montgomery County has done. And it's kind of created this race to the bottom where we're trying to have the focus on lowest tax rate, not necessarily the best tax rate and the best infrastructure. While the FY24 shortfall is mostly attributed to sluggish development activity, the council continues to pass legislation eroding this important revenue source without first identifying a feasible replacement. Bill 1624 that was enacted over my veto is estimated to reduce impact tax revenues by $13 million over the next 6 years. And while I appreciate the council improved the version that was recommended by the planning board, which would have been a complete train wreck, we did not need to cut revenues, and we shouldn't have cut revenues. This is the 6th time since 2013 the council has cut impact tax revenues available for providing adequate public facilities. And this is another example we can compare to Northern Virginia. We've cut taxes 6 times in order to make ourselves more attractive to the business community. The effect of reducing taxes has been absolutely zip. Being the cheapest date has not been the secret to economic development. All you have to do is look at Virginia, where they are the most expensive date in the region, and everybody seems to want to develop there because they know what to do. They raise the money to build the infrastructure. It's good for business and it's good for new development, and it attracts people to go there. Bill 2224, which was recently introduced, would further affect impact tax collection. This legislation would postpone revenue collection for residential development between 3 and 6 months, which it is right now, and 1 and 2 years for commercial projects. Based on projections by the county's Department of Finance, the bill could result in a reduction of $14.8 million over 6 years for school impact taxes and $13 million over 6 years for transportation impact taxes, with particularly large impacts in the early years of the CIP. And it's pretty easy to see how this happens. If I delay payments a year or two, that money's not available for the CIP in the years that it's been programmed. And when I say programmed, I mean where projects are scheduled to be built, meaning that money will not be there when the projects need the money, and it will likely lead to further delays in projects. Though the bill does not reduce overall collections, delays in the collection of revenue just compounds the effect of reductions to the impact tax estimates. These reductions are not assumed in my recommended CIP, and approving this legislation would require further project delays or reductions to remove $27.8 million from the CIP over a 6-year period. We're not in a position where we should be cutting almost $28 million out of our CIP. And despite these challenges, there are bright spots. We've seen increases in recordation and tax revenues as the housing market begins to recover, and we've successfully leveraged federal and state grants to advance key projects. These additional resources demonstrate the importance of strategic planning and partnerships in navigating physical constraints. I want to underscore that these investments are about creating a Montgomery County that is prosperous for decades to come. I would now welcome Jennifer Bryant and Rachel Silverman from our Office of Management and Budget, who are joining me now to review our CIP budget PowerPoint presentation, and then I'll come back for a few remarks after that.
Thank you, County Executive. I'm Jennifer Bryant, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and the CIP Manager, Rachel Silverman, will go over the presentation that we presented to the County Council this morning. Thank you, all of you, for being here and your interest in the capital budget and the amendments to the FY 25 to 30 Capital Improvements Program, which Rachel will go over now.
Thank you very much. Can everyone see my slides okay? Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. I'm going to go over some of these fairly quickly. Of course, the printed materials are available online, and we, of course, are available to answer questions afterwards. As the county executive had noted, this is a biennial CIP. It's an off year, and so we are only considering project changes that adhere to certain amendment criteria. And those criteria, some of the highlighted criteria are listed here. Generally speaking, these are amendments that are required because of the time-sensitive nature. They cannot wait until the next full CIP, such as urgent health and safety issues, recognizing outside funding, and so forth. In terms of the challenges, we are continuing to see high construction costs at bid for projects. So some of those COVID influences continue to remain with us, and that has the effect of eroding the buying power of the resources that we do have available to support the CIP. Our general obligation bonds in the biennial year are maintaining the $280 million a year level that has been approved by the County Council. That level has continued to erode in terms of the buying power over time. And this sort of illustrates that problem. So going all the way back to fiscal 2009, the county was issuing $300 million a year. And if we were to maintain pace in terms of buying power, we would be issuing $500 million a year today. Instead, we are issuing $280 million a year. And so that difference are projects that cannot be funded in our CIP due to limitations in resources. You heard from the county executive about the increases in recordation taxes and recordation tax premium due to the beginning of a housing recovery, as well as the $70 million reduction that is projected for impact taxes and the effect that the recent legislation has had on that, as well as the bill under consideration now at the county council to delay the payment of impact taxes. Again, this is not assumed in the recommended CIP. So if the council is to enact this legislation, it would require additional adjustments to reduce and defer projects that are currently programmed in the county executive's recommendation. Moving to the overview in terms of the fiscal 26 amendments, this CIP really does continue progress on the projects that were previously approved in the capital improvement program with limited disruption. However, what it is not able to do is to make significant progress on addressing the backlog in deferred maintenance for our facilities or in speeding up delivery of bus rapid transit due to limited resources. And so in order to make really substantial progress in those areas, moving into the next full CIP, a new revenue source will need to be identified. This is a chart that illustrates the allocation of the fiscal 26 amendments by broad categories. So you can see at the top, this CIP provides $5.85 billion over the 6-year period, and about 37% of that goes to support education. The next largest category of spending is transportation at 30%, and the balance goes to support Montgomery County government projects that are not transportation and the other outside agencies. This chart shows the allocation by category in the recommended amendments versus the last approved CIP. So you can see at the bottom, the total is $5.85 billion. That is an $83 million reduction from the prior approved CIP, or about 1.5%. That increase is driven by a change in the Montgomery County Public Schools recommendation that decreases by $113 million from the prior approved. That decrease is largely attributed to nearly $100 million in acceleration in projects for Montgomery County Public Schools. These are this is spending that we had anticipated and programmed would happen in the fiscal 25 through 30 period, but instead happened in fiscal 24. So that funding moves out of the 6-year period. It appears as a decrease here, but it does not represent a change in total resources available to support Montgomery County Public Schools projects. In addition to that, there is about a $15.5 million state aid shortfall that MCPS is anticipating for the Woodward High School project. It is not yet clear what the total final state aid allocation is going to be for Woodward High School. And so the county executive's recommended CIP does set aside capacity in order to fund that shortfall when the final amount is known. And so for that reason, this recommendation does hold capacity to fully fund the MCPS Board of Education request. Next down, you see funding for general government, which increases by about 2.5%. That's largely due to cost increases in existing projects, a couple of projects that are needed, enhancements that are required to maintain critical infrastructure in county projects, as well as new amendments to recognize outside funding from the state and federal government. In transportation towards the middle, you'll see about a $20 million decrease. And while this CIP does maintain with limited disruption most projects, the county executive was forced to defer a couple of projects for fiscal capacity, and we will discuss those in a few moments. And then there is a 3% increase for Montgomery County, for Montgomery College, which I'll discuss momentarily. This slide just shows how the funding for Montgomery County government projects is allocated. And to the right of the chart in the gray, you'll see that transportation represents more than 50% of the allocation, and mass transit is by far the largest piece of that at nearly $950 million. The next largest component is general government, which is about 10% in the red, and that goes to support economic development, technology, as well as all of the projects that go to support our infrastructure, maintenance, keeping our facilities in a state of good repair, like roof replacement, HVAC resurfacing, and the like. And the balance of funding goes to support all the other important things that county government has to do in terms of infrastructure, like flood mitigation, affordable housing, public safety, libraries, and recreational facilities. This chart shows how funding sources have changed since the last approved CIP in this recommendation. So the recommended levels are in blue, the previously approved levels are in gray, and you've heard about most of these already. But at the top, I just want to point out GO bonds are essentially unchanged. There is a decrease in intergovernmental revenues, but that is largely attributed to the accelerations for Montgomery County Public Schools that I mentioned previously, where funding that had been expected to be expended in the 6-year period was instead expended ahead of time. As you heard before, recordation tax and recordation tax premium are both up. There is a decrease in our PAYGO funding, which I will discuss in a few slides. Very little change to current revenue. And as you heard the county executive discuss earlier, we have experienced a decrease in impact taxes for both schools and transportation. Turning to some of the priority areas in the area of education, of course, education is a critical infrastructure priority of the county. As you saw on the prior slide, almost 40% of our CIP goes to support education, and this recommendation provides $1.74 billion for school construction, and it holds capacity to fully fund the Board of Education's request. As I had indicated earlier, the county executive's recommendation does increase the amount of funding that is set aside and unprogrammed in the CIP by $18 million in order to fund the state aid shortfall for Woodward High School when that final amount is known. And again, it does reflect the $98 million in net project accelerations for spending that occurred ahead of schedule. This slide goes into a little bit of detail regarding the enhancements that the school board request included. It included enhancements for 3 high school projects, Woodward High School, Crown, and Northwood High Schools, as well as the HVAC project. And the Board of Education request funded these by shifting resources from other projects that had been in their previously approved CIP. For Montgomery College below, the CE's recommendation does fully fund the request. The largest driver of some of this increase is funding that is added to match escalation for state aid increases in Montgomery College projects. And it does also allocate contributions from fund balance to support enhancements in a couple of the college's priority projects. Our state and federal partners have been very busy and successful in driving outside resources to support projects in our county. And this recommended CIP does add a few new projects to recognize some of those outside resources. At the top, you can see a new Brookville Depot HVAC project, which will be funded in large part by Green Bank loan proceeds. This represents the first time that Green Bank loan proceeds have been programmed in the county's capital improvement program. There are also community facility enhancements, and only they're supported by state grants, as well as an extension of the US 29 flash line to Columbia, which is funded by federal aid. and intergovernmental contributions. There are a few existing projects that this CIP adds new state and federal funding for, and the largest is the North Bethesda Metro Station Northern Entrance Project, which you'll see at the top. The CIP is amended to add $5 million for federal earmark to advance this project. In addition, the Department of Transportation recently received word of a new RAISE grant award, which you will be hearing additional detail about in the coming days and weeks. And then there are several other projects listed here where outside funding has been added. In addition, the recommended CIP makes investments in local dollars in several important county priority projects. At the top, you'll see White Oak Science Gateway. We have accelerated funding to align the road infrastructure work that the county needs to support for the Viva White Oak project so that it is better aligned with the new developer's project schedule. In addition, the CIP makes important investments in the elevator modernization and Americans with Disabilities projects to ensure that county facilities are fully accessible to residents that have mobility impairments. Let's see. Okay, and then the CIP is also adding funds to support rehabilitation work for the existing Gregg Road Bridge project, as well as additional facility assessments to support efforts to refurbish our recreational centers, and that the aim there is to improve resident experience and comfort while they are accessing our existing facilities. And finally, the county executive's recommendation adds funds for the Casa Rockville Welcome Center renovations, as well as Scotland AME Zion Church Second Century project to support these two community institutions that are a very important part of the fabric of Montgomery County. As I'd mentioned towards the beginning, we are continuing to see higher construction bids and projects that have been amended to reflect those higher costs are listed here. And then the CIP also updates the schedule for several projects that are not proceeding on the previously approved schedule. And so the projects here have been updated to reflect the latest implementation plan. For the other outside agencies, Park and Planning, the county executive's recommendation does fund the request. There is a small adjustment in the out years for inflation. And in the area of housing, the county executive, in partnership with the council, have invested more than $260 million in the CIP to support affordable housing in the community. For HOC, this recommendation provides $7.5 million over the 6-year period, and increased contributions for the Elizabeth House demolition project, as well as cider mill capital improvements, will be considered in March in the context of operating budget discussions. The recommended amendments do make prudent investment of cash, and one component of that is that the county received general obligation bond premium this fall as a result of the fall bond sale that yielded $31.5 million. That has allowed the county executive to return the fiscal 25 PAYGO amount to the policy level of 10%. That is going to provide the county executive as well as the county council some additional flexibility in addressing some of the fiscal 26 operating budget challenges moving into the March recommendation. As I'd mentioned previously, the CIP was not put together without having to make difficult choices, and there are two projects, Summit Avenue Extended and the Outdoor Firearms Training Center, which have had project schedule adjustments to begin beyond fiscal 30 as a result of reduced fiscal capacity. And there are 4 projects listed here below where the amendments recognize savings that have been achieved in those projects as they close out. And with that, I will turn it back to the county executive to discuss opportunities moving forward.
Thank you very much. There was a lot of work putting this budget together, and I really appreciate the work that that you and Jennifer did, and the whole staff over there. And I'd say, looking on the bright side, this was the easy part of the budget this year. The operating budget's going to be a little bit different animal, but we'll be coming to that in a couple of months. So I just want to, focus on what we think are, one of the primary needs. And I think the budget presentation ought to have made that pretty clear. We need a dedicated source of revenues for transportation. We need to be able to mimic what's been done in other jurisdictions that Montgomery County is not allowed to do. We believe there are really sensible ways to go about doing that. New state legislation we're anticipating is going to allow special taxing districts for corporations that will support transportation improvements. And it's essential. We have to identify new revenues if we're going to address congestion, plan for regional growth, provide transportation choices, and increase accessibility as regional competitors. Any kind of expanded growth or growth in places where have not planned it is going to have enormous infrastructure costs, and we are nowhere close to having the tools to deal with any of that, let alone just basically trying to deal with our transportation system. So I want to show people a couple of things that we are trying to focus on. Do you have those slides ready? I hope. Okay, so this is a view of our tax structure compared to two of our neighboring jurisdictions. One is the District of Columbia. DC's taxes are, I will say this is 2020, I believe, and we're waiting for their updated commercial taxation rates. But DC's commercial taxes are $1.89 on property worth more than $10 million. They're $1.60 or something like that on property worth more than $5 million, and then they dropped to $1.04. Residential taxes in DC were 85 cents. And so commercial property pays the base 85, and then they go up another $1.04 on commercial taxes. Across the river in Fairfax, their base tax is $1. It was $1.20.5. Now it's actually higher than that. And their total tax on commercial property is $1.51. They have all these special taxing districts in Tyson's Corner, in a couple of their corridors where they charge higher rates for commercial property in order to build the infrastructure. And this is what started in 2013, and it's what Bob McDonald's letter referred to. In contrast, and residential property is taxed, and I think $1.20 is wrong. I think it's $1.12. But whatever it is, it's lower. It's lower than commercial property by a lot. Montgomery County, on the far side here on the right, it's $1.15 for residents. It was $1.15, $1.15 for commercial property. There is no difference between the two. So you can see the yellow bars in the other two jurisdictions, which raise a lot of money that Montgomery County is not able to raise. And so it's a real problem, and it limits us in our ability to do capital projects. And, I think all of you, have enough common sense to realize that if you were thinking about buying something or building something over a period of years, that every year there's going to be inflation, and the things you're going to need are going to cost more, whether it's labor or materials. Our capital budget treats projects as if labor and materials never change in price. And then we're surprised when we're not able to fund everything that people want or expect in the capital budget. So this gives you an idea of how we compare to Virginia. And then there's another slide, my favorite slide. So this slide highlights, also, this is done by the District of Columbia, not by Montgomery County. This is a slide that compares Washington, Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County. And you can see on both of these graphs that Montgomery County is the lowest tax jurisdiction. And this is the graph on the right is for large corporations in Virginia, and the graph on the left is for small corporations. And what you'll see is, and you can see DC at the top. I mean, they definitely are the champions at raising property taxes. But Montgomery County's property taxes are lower than Virginia's. Our income taxes, which is the blue part of this graph, obviously are higher. We are above the taxes that are charged in Northern Virginia by easily a couple of $1,000s. But if you look at the orange chart, the orange bars only exist in Virginia. And the orange bars are things like the gross receipts tax. In Virginia, Fairfax County has a gross receipts tax on commercial property only, where they basically tax 3% of gross sales. And they have a varying rate, but 3% is the top. It yields them over $4 million, almost $5. And it yields Fairfax County in terms of dollars, $200 million a year. And I would ask any of you to imagine what the county would do and what we could do if we had $200 million a year, including opportunities to lower taxes on residents. But this is what Virginia plays with, and there is no orange bar in Prince George's in Montgomery County because we're not allowed to raise any of those taxes. The yellow bar is, I cannot read it on my graph. Want to help me out, Jennifer? What's the orange bar say? Oh, that's unemployment tax. Maryland has higher unemployment taxes than Virginia, but lower unemployment taxes than DC. And the final bar is the, somebody help me with not being able to read this tiny slide.
Looks like the red bar is
The red bar.
property.
The red bar. Which one is it?
Personal
Personal
property.
property.
It's personal property taxes. Our personal property taxes are half of what Virginia's personal property taxes. And these are not taxes on residents. These are another tax on businesses that's based on your business equipment, your trucks, your copying machines, your computers. All those things get taxed in all of our jurisdictions. Virginia's tax rate on a strictly commercial tax is twice of what Montgomery County's tax rate is. So when you add in the bars where they are bigger than we are, you can see that they really do collect far more from commercial property and businesses than Montgomery County does. It gives them a way different ability to have a tax structure and a way different ability to do infrastructure. I know Virginia's proposed budget is $400 million for bonds this year. That would be $120 million more than Montgomery County. So almost 50% more than Montgomery County in bonding authority. And imagine that extra bonding authority year over year, over 5 years. That would be $600 million more that Virginia spends building infrastructure that you need for economic development than what Maryland's able to spend. And it's just, it's a problem. So I just wanted to emphasize that because we've got room to, do these special taxing districts, and we would not even then approach the tax rates that they have in Northern Virginia or in DC. So we'd like to be more competitive, but more importantly, we'd like to be more competitive, not just in rates, but in terms of being able to provide the infrastructure the other jurisdictions can build and Montgomery County can't build. And I'll say the state's in the exact same box because they don't have a lot of other taxing tools that these other jurisdictions have. And so they're also limited as where they get the revenues from. And next. That's your contact information for Rachel Silverman. Guys have any questions about the budget? And I think I'm supposed to go. Right?
Okay. Thank you,
Or
everybody.
do you want to take questions now?
Okay, we're ready to
hi.
take questions? Okay, super awesome. Thank you, Mr. County Executive. So I think the questions are going to be regarding the capital budget. I see Tom Fitzgerald has a hand up. Tom, good afternoon, Fox 5 DC. And these are questions related to the proposed capital budget.
Yeah, it's kind of a twofer because it's about your budget and about the state budget. We just came out of a briefing on given the situation you're facing and the governor announcing now that he's going to raise rates on the top 1%. You already just said that Montgomery County is the most taxed county in the state. What kind of economic impact do you think this is going to have for your county as you're still trying to recover post-pandemic?
Well, we're higher on corporate income taxes than Virginia is. But Virginia has a whole bunch of other taxes. And mostly what we were focusing on is what the corporate taxes are. I don't think that the amount he's going to raise taxes is going to have a big effect. Most people believe in tax progressivity, and what he's introducing is a little bit of progressivity into our tax rates, a little more progressivity into our tax rates. And for most Maryland residents, I think you were in this press briefing, I think it was 80% will either see a reduction in taxes or no increase in taxes. And that to me is a pretty solid proposal. I mean, he's not going to solve a $3 billion hole in the budget if there are not more revenues brought in.
If I could just follow, $2 billion in cuts is not a small number. Are you at all aware of what that's going to mean for you in the county?
So we haven't seen everything spelled out. We know that what they told us, we were going to be actually net positive between the puts and the takes in his budget. We'd actually have more money from the state than we get today. So we took that as a good sign. He talked a lot about, I don't know what examples they used with you, but they were talking about how different departments in the state buy the same computer and pay different prices for it. There's a lot of procurement reform that they probably could do that would help reduce the cost of doing business in the state. And this is, something, these are things we've been looking at, and these are things the state can, I certainly believe they can do that. So I'm encouraged by the direction they're going in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Jeannie Bixby, Local 360. But that's not today.
Yes, same outlet, new name. Hi, Mark, and thank you, Lorna. I had two questions. One, I just want to clarify that I understand correctly. The Woodward Auditorium funding, I mean, that was a big conversation and controversy last year. So this is now funding that.
Yep.
Okay.
We're going to have to pay and fill the hole that the school system created.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on that?
They were supposed to build that project with prevailing wage. For some reason, they chose not to. So money they were eligible from the state to cover their costs, they're not eligible for. And so they've got to make up the difference. And so anything that the schools have to make up the difference means that the county government essentially has to make up the difference, since the schools don't have any funding sources other than us. So we're holding the bag, and we're going to have to pay the difference here.
Gotcha. And my second question is, you talk a lot about the special taxing districts. You spoke about this in this presentation last year. You talked to me personally about it. What is your action plan for this? Are you focusing on the folks in Annapolis? What is your action plan to get people to pay attention to this?
The big thing is there's actually going to be legislation in Annapolis, and it's picked up, I'd say it's picking up support, mostly because the Republican jurisdictions are in the same box Montgomery County is. Nobody in the state can fund their transportation needs given where the state's budget is and given their limitations on raising revenues. So it's easier to do at the local level. Locals understand what their needs are and justify where they're making the decisions they're making. I will say it's harder for a legislator. Montgomery County legislators fight very hard for us, but the majority of legislators don't represent Montgomery County, and getting a legislator to convince their taxpayers to pay for large projects in big counties is not always the easiest thing to do. And that's why Virginia moved away from that. You know, they gave the authority to raise taxes to the local jurisdictions rather than focusing all the authority on the Virginia House and Senate, because they could not do the same things. When the Northern Virginia got these taxing authorities, they were supported by the business community, because first of all, the tax on businesses cannot be used for feeding people, schools, homeless shelters. Can't be used for any of that. It only has to be used on economic infrastructure that is really tied to economic development. So in the business community, they saw this as an opportunity to build the kind of infrastructure they needed to tackle some of Northern Virginia's transportation problems. I think as a Maryland resident, anybody else here who is, Tyson's Corner used to be the poster child for where you want to drive when you don't need to go anywhere fast. And it's, you know, they've made major transformations at Tyson's Corner because they've got the funding to be able to do that. Other jurisdictions as well. The Potomac Yards project in Arlington County, a county with a budget that is a fraction of Montgomery County's budget. I want to say their budget's like $800 million, but something really small. They were able to put $250 million in funding into Potomac Yards project, one project, floating bonds that were paid for, you know, by revenue streams. That's a county with a fraction of our wealth that could do that because they have the right revenue streams to make it worthwhile. And of course, the developers over there are thrilled because it got them a metro station entrance and the ability to make much greater value out of their land. So they saw it as a positive. Virginia developers have seen it as a positive. And for some reason, you know, the council or the county here has been allergic to it for at least 20 years.
Gotcha. And who's sponsoring that legislation in Annapolis?
There are a couple different bills that do different things. I think Ryan Spiegel's coming out will have a bill, and Chris Fairley, I think it's Fairley, in Frederick County has a bill, and we're hoping that it'll get the support it needs. But I think, frankly, the council has to play a role in this. You know, I advocated last year, but the council had taken no position. I mean, we can't continue to take no position on whether or not we're going to raise the money to build the infrastructure that you need for economic development. You know, if people want housing, jobs are what drive housing. Housing does not drive jobs. You know, if you ask any rational economist, they'll tell you if you're successful in attracting jobs, you attract people who want to live there and be close to jobs. If you're a jurisdiction where your jobs are shrinking, you're not planning for population growth. You're planning for population shrinkage. So anybody who thinks we're going to be able to be successful economically without being willing to tackle building infrastructure, they'll be waiting a very long time. And I'll say we've waited a very long time. We are, you know, Virginia made changes 12, 13 years ago. You can see the results across the river. Tyson's Corner was not what it is today, 12, 13 years ago. They made a conscious decision to change their fate. And we've not been willing to do that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jeannie. Members of the media, any additional questions regarding the county executive's proposed CIP? Any additional questions? No more questions on this topic? Going once, twice? Thank you, Ms. Bryan and Ms. Silverman for joining us this afternoon, Mr. County Executive. All the topics.
Thank you.
So moving on to other things, sort of talk a little bit about MLK Day of Service. Besides Inauguration Day, Monday is also MLK Day. How ironic. And our government offices will be closed in honor of this holiday. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. King is also a guiding light for many of us who are concerned about the next 4 years under the new administration. Every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. I don't think there can be any clearer statement of the choices that are in front of us. This weekend, thousands of people in our area remember Dr. Martin Luther King's work and his legacy by volunteering on community projects. Every year, our county helps coordinate day of service events, which benefit many of our community partners and in turn, residents who are most in need. Montgomery County Volunteer Center has set those events up at recreation centers across the county on Saturday, January 18th, Sunday, January 19th. Volunteers are asked to register through the Montgomery County Volunteer Center. On Sunday, I'm proud to host the county's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. It's an annual show coordinated by the MLK Jr. Commemorative Committee at the Strathmore. It'll feature music and creative performances that focus on injustice, resistance, and hope. This has been part of Montgomery County's MLK Day for the last 30 years now. But because of the inauguration, it will be held on Sunday starting at 4 p.m. Tickets are free, but required to attend. So please get your free tickets. They can be found through Strathmore and the Montgomery County Office of Human Rights website. You can get these things online. And lastly, on the health update, we're currently experiencing seasonal highs in flu cases, but it is not the only threat to our community. COVID, RSV, and even norovirus are also making people sick. I know a lot of people who've gotten sick actually in the last few weeks. This week, state health leaders issued a new face mask recommendation for individuals visiting or working in healthcare facilities. It applies to outpatient and long-term care centers. The county is also making face masks available for patients visiting clinics. Montgomery County saw a rise in the percentage of positive COVID-19 tests and twice as many people hospitalized with complications since the last update. There were 31 patients this week compared to 15 patients 2 weeks ago. State hospitalizations are also up. Vaccines are the best form of protection. They've been since they first came out, and frequent hand washing can stop the spread of germs. Staying home and wearing a mask around others when you have respiratory symptoms is important to help control these viruses from spreading. And let's remind everyone of these important steps as we finish out the flu season. Now I'd like to give my health team and any other county leaders on this call opportunity to share updates they want before opening the discussion up to questions from the rest of you. So health team, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. As the county executive mentioned, we have been seeing more respiratory viruses lately, especially flu is what is peaking right now. And the hospitalizations we have seen increased, doubled from 15 cases last week to 31 cases this week. It is I'm sorry, not flu, that's COVID cases. It is helpful to put that in context when we look at where we were at this time last year. In 2023, we had 68 hospitalizations and 4 folks in the ICU. And in 2022, at this time, we had 152 folks hospitalized in acute beds and 24 in the ICU. So we do recognize those numbers are going up, but we certainly are seeing significant improvements from where we were before. As was mentioned, if you are in a healthcare facility, please take caution. Hospitals, doctors' offices, you may find that they ask you to wear a mask when you're there to help protect those who are most vulnerable. And if you are one of those folks who are vulnerable with multiple medical conditions or the very young or very old, this would be a good time to think about certainly wearing a mask if you're in a healthcare setting or if you're going to be in places with a lot of people. We know that flu is on the rise, COVID and RSV are there. It's great to get a vaccine if you have that available. We are also seeing other common cold viruses and cases of walking pneumonia that are elevated. So stay safe all around, wear a mask, wash your hands, cover your coughs, and all of those things that can help you be healthy. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Members of the media, we're opening it up right now for general questions. Please raise your hands if you have any questions for the county executive and or Dr. Davis. I see Marianne Chassat, Montgomery Community Media. Good afternoon, Marianne.
Good afternoon. Thank you. County executive, wanted to ask, with the water main breaks and leaks that are happening, has the county been talking with WSSC and just do you have any updates there, anything to share?
Yeah, we do WSSC's budget every year, but it's, this thing is pretty much entirely created out of WSSC. I'll say, kind of bluntly, no one's been willing to fully fund WSSC's budget because it's large and because the needs they have are pretty large. And this is kind of an example of the needs they're struggling with. I mean, I think a couple of weeks ago, I ended my briefing after the first water main break on Bethesda Avenue, and I said, this is probably not the last. I expect to see more. And then next week, we got the expected to see more part of it. It is a concern. A large portion of their infrastructure is over 50 years old. And so these pipes were built a very long time ago. And the pipe that broke on Wisconsin Avenue might have been 93 years old, something like that. So we got a lot of old infrastructure under our streets. And the cold temperatures posed a real problem. And the longer it stays cold, the more stress it puts on the concrete. And I was thinking about this the other day. This is the longest in a while that I can remember seeing snow on the ground to any accumulation after a snowfall. I mean, we're a week beyond the snowfall and the stuff is still around. And that means, you've got cold temperatures, you've got ground temperature getting lower, and you've got cold water running through the pipes. And the combination of all those things is leading to these breaks. It will not surprise me because, obviously these repairs were not in the WSSC budget. And they're going to have to make do with the resources they have. We'll see if they come back to us during the actual budget and make any recommendations about where they think they might need to go. But I think it's a warning sign that, we can be, a little bit too sure of ourselves that they're not going to need the money for these kind of projects and wind up with more surprises like what's happened in the last week. I don't think any of us anticipated this level of breaks. And I think we have to be cognizant of what we're funding, and are we funding it enough that we're going to be able to avoid this? Because just because you don't fund it when they present it to us doesn't mean you don't fund it when the thing breaks. And that's what we're wind up doing. We're wind up funding this stuff when the things break.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marianne. Members of the media, any additional questions for the county executive this afternoon? No more questions? Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Stay safe, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, thank you all very much for being here today.